The world in which the Song of Ice and Fire book and Game of Thrones HBO TV series is set in has perhaps become one of the most beloved and well-known in the fantasy genre. From the Wall of the North to the Pyramids of Meereen, the world George R. R. Martin has created and fleshed out is an incredibly complex, diverse, and mysterious one, with magic, mythical creatures, and a lot of sex. I'm a massive fan of both the books and the show, and the series has definitely captured a lot of my imagination. And because it seems like everybody is making a Game of Thrones themed video in the wake of the premiere of the final season, I kind of went, why not put my scientific and biology knowledge to good use by having a bit of a thought exercise. One of the things I personally have found interesting about the series is the mysterious past of the world and the creatures that inhabit it. George R. R. Martin's series is filled with animals both familiar to us, both extinct and extant, like mammoths, lions, aurochs, giant squids, and direwolves, but he also has filled it with mythical creatures like dragons, fireworms, unicorns, giants, and of course, the White Walkers. The latter sort, to many, makes it seem like science and biology and evolution does not belong in a Game of Thrones. It's fantasy, they say, don't overthink it. But, curiously, Martin has expressly said the opposite. For instance, in interviews, he has said that he wants his dragons to be realistic.
These are not quite accurate for my dragons. These are not my dragons, because my dragons only have 2 legs. They don't have front legs. Other dragons, by fantasy writers, have 4 legs and wings. I just have 2 legs and wings.
Why? Why?
Because it's more scientifically accurate. There's no animal on Earth that has 4 legs plus wings. Nobody has that sort of thing. So even though it's fantasy, I tried, too much of a science fiction guy, I want to make it accurate here.
In interviews, Martin has this curious concern for scientific accuracy for his, what people genuinely think is a fantasy world. George R. R. Martin is fascinating to me because it seems that the book and show series isn't fully magical or fantasy. It's a realistic and science fiction-esque take on fantasy, and great detail has been put into making things that happen and exist in our story scientifically plausible and possible. George has taken the time to think these things out and allow the fans to speculate things scientifically, or at least partly. And as a person who is obsessed with anthropology, biology, paleontology, and evolution, I want to ask, hypothetically, what would a Westerosi paleontologist or biologist conclude about their world's prehistory and fossils? I essentially want to act like a medieval scientist, a maester of sorts, and take a detailed examination of the creatures that exist in George R. R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire series. I will, in this video, primarily be tackling the humanoid races of the world, and construct a speculative phylogenetic evolutionary tree, and a prehistory behind the races, knowing what we know now about evolution and biology, and based solely using the information given in the books and show. I will primarily be referencing the main book series, A Game of Thrones to the released sample chapters of A Winds of Winter, and the standalone books like A World of Ice and Fire. My name is Maester Treyman, and let us begin the paleontology and anthropology of Game of Thrones. Planetos. As fans will likely know, the vast majority of Game of Thrones takes place in the continent of Westeros. But there are several different continents that exist in the currently known world. To the east of Westeros, we have the large continent of Essos, and south of Essos, we have the probably extremely large continent of Sothorios. George R. R. Martin has stated that his world is round, and it seems like the planet that the series is set on, which I'll just call Planetos for brevity, is very analogous to our own Earth. Westeros being akin to Europe, Essos being akin to Asia, and Sothorios being akin to Africa. Because Westeros is currently stuck in a several thousand-year-long period of technological stagnation akin to Europe's Middle Ages, the current map of the world is incomplete, and much of what we know is limited to the Westerosi perspective. Martin has stated that things said about the more distant regions might be inaccurate, as the transmission of information across locations in Planetos is very limited. Like our own world as it was known in the Middle Ages, there very well might be other continents, as of yet unexplored and undiscovered, on Planetos. To further the similarities to our own world, we know that Planetos is very old and is not a young Earth. Many maesters, the Game of Thrones equivalents to medieval naturalists, scientists, and physicians, believe Planetos to be at the very least several 100,000 years old. It seems they have based this number on historical records such as the reigns of ancient kings. But Samuel Tarley notes that, like many of the ancient histories of our own world, these histories don't make much sense, as kings in them live for hundreds of years, and historical anachronisms are everywhere in these stories, and therefore we should take what they say with a grain of salt. They can very well be inaccurate. With this statement, George R. R. Martin seems to be having an intentional dig at the biblical and religious histories put forth in the Bible, as the texts are filled with patriarchs that live for hundreds of years to even thousands of years, and have things like camels being domesticated and used at a time when such animals hadn't been domesticated yet. In our story, we have first-hand information that confirms that Planetos is at the very least over 1 million years old. The Children of the Forest, an elf-like species that actually lives for hundreds of years, claims their species has been living in Westeros for at the very least 1 million years. Additionally, the geology of many places tells us that Planetos is likely billions of years old, as stones like granite and limestone take a very long time to form by natural processes on our Earth. From all this information, it seems likely that Planetos is in fact closer in age with our Earth. And like humans of our own Middle Ages, it seems that Westerosi just haven't figured this out yet. This information, though sounding somewhat inconsequential, is actually important when we will examine the biology of creatures of Planetos, as this old age of the planet allows for enough time for evolution by natural selection to occur in the Game of Thrones world. Now, there are at the very least 6 known races of humanoids that have been confirmed to exist in Planetos, meaning they have been encountered directly by point-of-view characters, and we know they are not just myths. These races are seemingly traditional humans, which I'll call for convenience Homo sapiens, the Children of the Forest, the Giants, the Ebonys, the Brindled Men, and the Others, or for show watchers, the White Walkers. First up, the Homo sapiens that inhabit Planetos. The quote-unquote normal humans of Planetos seem to be the most widely dispersed of the other humanoids, and have migrated to every known continent, and have adapted to many of these diverse environmental conditions. In doing so, they have evolved into races, much like Earth humans, with dark-skinned humans, light-skinned humans, humans with almond-shaped eyes, humans with tall bodies, humans with short bodies, and so on, seemingly in accordance to many of the same biological evolutionary processes found on Earth, such as Allen and Bergman's rules. For instance, Summer Islanders, which appear to be geographically closer to the equator, have darker skins than the Andals of Westeros, which originate from a more geographically northern latitude, and consequently have more fair skin. Skin color in humans seemingly occurs on a gradient moving away from the equator in Planetos, with lighter skin frequencies moving more north and the reverse moving towards the equator. Summer Islanders to Giscari to Rhoynar to Andals. Again, much like how it is on Earth with humans. On Earth, this physical characteristic of humans is likely due to UV light radiation levels increasing towards the equator. Despite these physical differences, unlike the other humanoids, it seems that all these races of humans belong to the same species, Homo sapiens. As Summer Islanders seemingly can interbreed with Andals, and Valerians can interbreed with Dothraki, and so on. This means that everyone from the people of Yeti, who resemble East Asians, to the Ironborn, who resemble Scandinavian Vikings, belong to the same species, Homo sapiens. We know from histories that Homo sapiens do not originate from Westeros, as the continent was colonized by a series of Homo sapien migrations from Essos. First, by the first men crossing a no longer existing land bridge called the Arm of Dorne 12,000 years ago, then later by the Andal 6,000 years ago by boat, and after them the Rhoynar 1,000 years ago also by boat. It seems likely that Homo sapiens originated in Essos, possibly in the Dothraki Sea region, as a location in this region is curiously called by humans the womb of the world, and myths are associated with this region being the birthplace of mankind. However, it is also possible Homo sapiens originated from further east, beyond the Bone Mountains, maybe Ashai. We just don't know. Homo sapiens is the most populous of the 6 races we know of, with perhaps an estimated 150 million people in the known world, 40 million in Westeros alone, which is roughly what the world population was for people on Earth in the 1st century AD, which is surprisingly small considering Westeros is currently in the Middle Ages. But this could be a gross underestimation, and the world population could in truth be significantly larger. We just don't know. All of our point-of-view characters are Homo sapiens in our story, from Arya to Aeron Damphair to Tyrion Lannister. The Ebonys. The second of the humanoids that inhabit Planetos are the Ebonys. These people have sloping foreheads, heavy brows, lots of hair, broad shoulders, and are squat and short in stature. They originate from an isolated island to the far north of Essos called Ib. From A World of Ice and Fire, we know that these Ebonys can only interbreed with other Ebonys. As if they try to interbreed with Homo sapiens, these pregnancies result in stillbirths, malformed children, or children that are sterile. There is some evidence that might suggest that this might not be the case with all Homo sapiens. Ebonys might be able to mate with a select few Homo sapiens, specifically some of the descendants of the first men, such as Skagosi, which makes sense due to these people's original close geographic proximity to Ib. It seems likely that the Ebonys are either a distinct species from Homo sapiens or are in the gradual process of becoming a new species, as there appears to be a building genetic barrier preventing gene flow between the two populations, and over time this barrier will likely completely prevent interbreeding. Arya, Daenerys, Catelyn, and many others have encountered the Ebonys throughout our story, and they are a relatively more common sight in Planetos than the other races. They are famous for whaling and fishing, they seemingly can learn Homo sapien language, and their island of Ib is very isolated and has very little contact with the outside world, and thus we have not too much information about them. The Giants and the Children of the Forest were Westeros' original inhabitants prior to the migration of Homo sapiens to the continent. The Giants and Children of the books are noticeably more animal-like than they are in the show. Giants are 10 to 14 feet tall and look more like huge Sasquatches with shaggy hair covering their entire bodies. They have proportionally smaller heads and craniums, and larger hind limbs than forelimbs. Giants seem to have limited tool usage, preferring tree trunks instead of spears or swords. They additionally appear to not be as intelligent as the other races. The Children are a small humanoid race, with dappled deer-like skin, large ears, and large cat-like slitted eyes, and hands with 4 fingers that end in claws. They are smaller, around the size of children. The Children seem to be subterranean, living in dark tunnels underneath Westeros. They are pretty intelligent with significant tool usage, creating spears and stone tools. We know they have longer lifespans than humans, probably in the 200 years to 300 years. As of 300 AC, present day of our story, both creatures are seemingly on the brink of extinction, with very small populations of giants and children remaining that we know of. The relationship between Homo sapiens, giants, and children is unclear. The children claim a certain type of kinship with the giants, which might suggest they were at some point close relatives. Unlike with the Ebonys and brindled men, it is not especially well recorded if Homo sapiens, children, and giants can interbreed. There are rumors of hybrids between the children and humans, chronic men, and giants and the humans, Hodor, but there's little evidence to support this. Like the Ebonys, giants and children can speak the language of Homo sapiens, such as the Old Tongue. Though, the children are also capable of speaking a language impossible for Homo sapiens to speak physically, called the True Tongue. Additionally, myths and legends about creatures very similar to the giants and children can be found in Essos, so it's unclear if the giants and children originated in Essos and migrated into Westeros, like Homo sapiens, or if they originated in Westeros and migrated into Essos. Giant bones have been discovered throughout Essos, including on the Isle of Ib, and it appears that these two species were once incredibly widely spread across the known world. Many commonly believe these creatures to be extinct, but living giants have been encountered directly by Jon, and living children have been encountered directly by Bran in the Cave of the Three-Eyed Crow. Both seem to only exist currently north of the Wall, but the children might live underground and in hiding further south. The brindled men, or the Sothori, are the native inhabitants of Sothorios, probably the continent we know the least about. They have only been encountered 3 times, and very briefly by POV characters: Daenerys, Barristan, and Victarion, Theon's uncle. They are very ape-like, with strong, long arms, large square teeth, heavy jaws, sloping foreheads, and flat snout-like noses that give them a hog-like appearance. Their skins are brindled, thus their names. Some brindled men can learn Homo sapien languages, such as the trade talk, but otherwise they are considered not the brightest and savage and very primitive. Like the Ebonys, the brindled men cannot interbreed with Homo sapiens, with pregnancies always resulting in deformed stillbirths. This again suggests the brindled men belong to a separate species from Homo sapiens, possibly more so than the Ebonys, as they cannot even give birth to live hybrid young. And of course, lastly, we have the others, or White Walkers, I don't even know what to call them, that we know the least about. We know essentially nothing about the White Walkers in the books. They are the main villains of the series, but have only appeared directly, wait for it, a grand total of 2 times in all of the books. In the prologue of A Game of Thrones, and in Samuel 1 in A Storm of Swords. Nowhere else. Though we are supposed to see more of them in The Winds of Winter, if it ever comes out. We don't even really know what the White Walkers in the books really look like. They are tall, gaunt, and graceful, and supposedly beautiful. Their skins are white as milk, and their eyes are bright blue, like stars. The mummified appearance of the show White Walkers might not be the case. White Walkers have pale blue blood and shiny milk glass-like bones. They walk on snow rather than sink in, and leave no footprints. They enjoy cold temperatures and avoid sunlight and warmth. They speak a strange tongue that sounds like cracking ice. They seemingly originate from the lands of Always Winter, the furthest point north in the known world, and where very few humans go. The others possess camouflaging armor similar to the Predator, which makes them appear invisible, and the razor-thin swords they use can cut through essentially any metal and seem to glow blue, which makes me think of lightsabers. They have the ability to resurrect the dead as whites, and it seems possible that they achieve this in a manner similar to skin changing or warging, simply using corpses instead of wolves or eagles. something George R. Martin has shown in previous work. In the books, it appears they can animate dead flesh itself, as Bran's wolf Summer tries to eat a white bear and tears it apart, though the meat still moves even as he ingests it. Unlike with the show, we do not know if the others have a leader or a goal exactly. They seem to enjoy killing organic life, as they laugh when fighting Night's Watch Rangers in the prologue. There are many legends about others and humans mating, but it is unclear if these have any truth to them or not. Additionally, unlike with the show, it is unclear how the White Walkers are created or born. Sure, the wildling Craster sacrifices his Homo sapien sons to the others, and his wives believe them to be transformed into others through some unknown method, but some seem to forget that Craster also sacrifices sheep to the others when he does not have sons to give, and the others seemingly take these sacrifices as well. It could very well be that the creation of others involves organic life, and not necessarily human life. But again, things are very unclear as far as the books go. We know from the show that human babies are transformed into others through magic, and that the others were originally created by the children of the forest through magic. It is unclear if this is the case in the books. A personal theory of mine is that the others might be the remnants of a technologically advanced civilization that is simply being misinterpreted by medieval humans as magic and mystical. There's some evidence to back this up. Much of Martin's previous work involves the debunking of magic for more natural explanations, and much of his work involves societies misinterpreting one another. Martin is notorious for serving as the antithesis of Tolkien, and has shown a dislike for having wholly evil villains, which makes me think that the others are simply misunderstood rather than fully evil. Additionally, something rather interesting to discuss in the show's behind the scenes has to do with the armor design for the show's White Walkers. Michelle Clapton created many of the costumes for the others in the show, under the assumption that the armor was actually scavenged bits of art and architecture from some long-forgotten culture of the far north. Because this is a hypothetical biological and scientific analysis, I will be removing magic from the equation when trying to fit the others into my evolutionary tree. Instead of the others being transformed humans, they are their own separate species. Don't yell at me, that's just how I'm going to do it. Now that we have addressed all the major known humanoids of Planetos, I'd like to note that interestingly, many of these races correlate to ones that once existed on our own Earth. The thing is that Earth was once a lot like the fantasy worlds in Lord of the Rings and A Song of Ice and Fire, with there once being many different types of humans living in different geographical regions at the same time, rather than just Homo sapiens as it is today. The Ebonys very much resembled the Neanderthals or Neandertals of Eurasia during the Ice Age. The children of the forest resembled the hobbits or Homo floresiensis of the island of Flores. And lastly, the brindled men seem to resemble either Homo erectus or Australopithecines, particularly the lineage of the robust Australopithecines. And it seems George R. Martin used the ape men that once existed on prehistoric Earth as an inspiration for Planetos. But unlike on Earth, where these other species of humans became extinct during the last ice age before the advent of civilization, Planetos is almost like an alternate history to Earth, where instead of Neanderthals and Homo erectus and so on becoming extinct, these human offshoots persisted close to the modern day, something that very much could have happened here if things turned out a little differently. This is interesting because it seemed to be something of a trend in the world of Ice and Fire. Many species that are extinct by the Middle Ages of our world are still lingering around in Westeros. Mammoths, aurochs, European lions, megaloceros, and unicorns, woolly rhinos, are rare and on the decline, but present in Westeros. Why is this? Perhaps Planetos had a more gradual transition from its last glacial maximum, or ice age, into modern day, rather than the more extreme one of our own Earth. And this allowed for a less severe mass extinction for many ice age species to survive longer. Perhaps the long night and the others have something to do with this. Getting back to the humanoids of Planetos, it seems possible that all these species save the White Walkers are close relatives, and share a common, upright walking, ape-like, Australopithecus-like ancestor. And I suggest they might just be separate species belonging to the same genus, which I will dub for convenience Homo. I suggest that there were at the very least 3 distinct splits in the lineage of Planetos' Homo. Based on the distribution of the races across the world, and their similarities to Earth humans, it seems likely that the common ancestor of humans, the Ebonys, giants, children, and brindled men, originated from Sithorios, or at least Eastern Essos. The common ancestor to these races' analogies on Earth originated in Africa, and because Sithorios is very clearly Planetos' Africa, the analogy seems to fit. The first major split that occurred between the genus Homo occurred when the ancestors of humans, the children, giants, and Ebonys, separated from the ancestors of the brindled men, as they migrated out of Sithorios, possibly across some unknown or no longer existing land bridge, possibly by Ulthos. Again, in a manner probably similar to how the ancestors of Neanderthals, Homo erectus, and other archaic humans left Africa, by the way of the Sinai Peninsula in the Horn of Africa. This split occurs probably very early on, probably at the very least a few million years ago. While one lineage remained in Sithorios, the other migrated into Essos. This would explain the brindled men's more primitive and ape-like appearance, as well as their inability to interbreed with the other races, as they are the furthest removed and most distantly related. From here, it appears the second split occurred between the ancestors of the lineage that became the giants and the children, and the ancestors of the lineage that became Homo sapiens and the Ebonys. Because of scant information, this split is the least clear to me, as the giants and children have a very murky fossil record, and their ability to interbreed with other races is poorly defined. One possible theory is that the common ancestors of children and giants migrated to Westeros across the Arm of Dorne, and then evolved into two distinct species from there, with a second migration back to Essos. Alternatively, children and giants might have evolved in Essos first, and then migrated together into Westeros. Either way, it appears both giants and children ended up in Westeros at least 1 million years ago. The third and last split between the species, Homo sapiens and the Ebonys, is perhaps the clearest defined and the one that we have the most evidence for. It seems that after leaving Sithorios and migrating westward and splitting from the giants and children, some humans remained in the Dothraki Sea region, while others migrated further west and north to Andalos, Norvos, and Ib, which might have been connected to the mainland at this time. From myths and histories, we know that an ancient and now extinct race known as the Hairy Men once existed in western Essos, and these men seem to have resembled the Ebonys but were taller. This race might have served as a transitional species between the Ebonys and the more basal or primitive humans that were more similar to Homo sapiens. We also know that the Ebonys possessed a much wider range than they do in the modern day. I suggest that these more southern and eastern Dothraki Sea humans became the Homo sapiens that eventually would migrate outward and colonize the world, while the other humans that migrated west and north became the Ebonys and Hairy Men. After their expansion out of the Dothraki Sea, history tells us that these Homo sapiens warred, outcompeted, and then replaced the Hairy Men and Ebonys in eastern and northern Essos, until the Ebonys only existed on the island of Ib, which was spared from this event due to its isolation. It is also possible that during this event, the Ebonys and the Hairy Men intermixed somewhat with some early Homo sapiens, and contributed some DNA to the lineage of the first men. This would again complete the Neanderthal-Homo sapien comparison, as this is quite similar to what happened between these two species in our world. Homo sapiens replaced and somewhat absorbed Neanderthals during their migration out of Africa, with Neanderthals contributing a small amount to modern European and Asian populations as a result of this event. From here, Homo sapiens used their sophisticated technology and ingenuity to migrate to other parts of the world, the first men crossing into Westeros, much like how Native Americans migrated into America through the Bering Strait, the ancestors of the Yiti, Lingi, and Ashai traveling over the Bone Mountains eastward, and the ancestors of the Southern Islanders crossing the Southern Sea. These migrations had to have occurred relatively more recently and quickly than the previous Ebonese migrations, as there has to be a more constant gene flow between these populations to ensure they remained part of the same species and not distinct species. During these Homo sapien migrations, many of the other Homo species became extinct or near extinct, such as the giants and children. By about 10,000 years, odds are most Homo sapiens on Planetos had arrived in their modern-day distributions, which gives enough time for these peoples to evolve their respective skin colors, body types, and other adaptations. The Carthene and Valerian Homo sapiens seem to reflect a more recent migration into their modern regions because of this. These races have light skins, but probably should have evolved dark skins if they remained in their respective regions for thousands of years. And yeah, that's about where we are as far as the evolution and migration of humans in GOT, or A Song of Ice and Fire. The final evolutionary phylogeny I propose looks a bit like this: the brindled men, the giants and children, the Ebonys, and the humans with some Ebonese admixture. But what about the others or White Walkers? Where do they fit on this tree? Well, excluding magic has no place in the world being created by the Citadel. If I were a biologist in Westeros and I were to stumble upon a White Walker, I'd classify it as something wholly unrelated to any other organism on Planetos. Martin's description of the others and their equipment in the books to me simply sounds like advanced technology, and I'm a supporter of the idea that these are extraterrestrials or an advanced culture that medieval peoples simply think are magic. Martin has been quoted as saying that the others are a different sort of life, inhuman, which to me invokes the extraterrestrial beings of Lovecraft. Their entire anatomy seems alien in appearance, and everything from their blue blood to their crystalline skeletons screams inorganic life having an entirely separate evolution from biological or organic life. I suggest the others evolved from silicon-based or some other kind of substance-based life forms, and had an independent evolution based on crystalline life rather than biological life. You heard it from me, the others are aliens. Odds are I'm an idiot and I'm looking too deeply into things, but who knows, Martin loves sci-fi and loves Lovecraft, which that's right up his alley. Like something my favorite Game of Thrones theorist YouTube channel says, I'm probably wrong about half of this. And yeah, that's my scientific examination of A Song of Ice and Fire or A Game of Thrones. Hope you enjoyed. This video has been rather cool to create, as at the end of the day, odds are there is no clear right or wrong answer, and the exact prehistoric organisms of the humans of Planetos will remain a mystery. This is the theory I put forth, based on the given information. I couldn't help feel like Darwin or something, having to think for myself and piece things together like a detective. I don't know, it's just a lot of fun, and I hope you thought the same. I might revisit Game of Thrones and the Song of Ice and Fire series in the future, because I really love the series, but until then, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoy the last season of Game of Thrones, and Winds of Winter if it comes out. Alright, bye! Dun, 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 dun,